For 48 years, the WOW signal has been our greatest cosmic mystery. A single burst of radio waves from deep space, never repeated, never explained. Dr. Elara Vance built the most sophisticated AI in history to prove it was nothing more than reflected noise from a passing comet. But when her machine finished its analysis, it didn't debunk the signal. It decoded it. What she found wasn't a greeting from the stars. It was a warning from the dead. The only sound in the cavernous university lecture hall was the rhythmic click and whir of the slide projector, an ancient beast in a room that otherwise hummed with the silent, invisible energies of modern technology. On the large screen behind Dr. Elara Vance, an image was displayed that had haunted the fringes of her field for nearly 50 years. It was a piece of computer printout, unremarkable but for a sequence of characters circled in red pen. 6EQJ5, the WOW signal. Elara paced slowly before the screen, a shark in a too small tank. She was a woman built of sharp angles and sharper intellect, dressed in a practical charcoal blazer and dark jeans that spoke of a complete indifference to fashion. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept across the faces of the students scattered throughout the tiered seating. They were young, their expressions a mixture of academic diligence and dreamy curiosity. It was the curiosity she was here to kill. For 48 years, she began, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. This string of characters has been the Roswell of radio astronomy, the great what if, a supposed greeting from the stars, a cosmic hello from E.T. It has fueled speculation, inspired truly terrible science fiction, and, most regrettably, diverted valuable funding and attention from legitimate research. She clicked a remote. The slide changed to an animation of a vast, star-dusted stretch of space. A small, icy body trailed a shimmering tail of gas. The myth is, as always, more seductive than the reality. The reality is likely plumbing, cosmic plumbing, but plumbing nonetheless. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the hall. The signal was observed at a frequency of 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line. A frequency protected for our use, one we don't broadcast on. This, the believers will tell you, is the magic frequency any intelligent life would use to say hello. It's a powerfully romantic notion. She let the word romantic hang in the air, as if it were a profanity. The problem with romance is that it wilts under scrutiny. In 2017, the Center for Planetary Science proposed a far more plausible, if less exciting, explanation. Comets, specifically the massive hydrogen clouds that trail around comets, which we now know were transiting the exact patch of sky the Big Ear telescope was observing on August 15, 1977. She gestured to the animation. The signal was strong, improbably strong, but a sufficiently dense hydrogen cloud, reflecting a powerful terrestrial radio signal back at our own telescope. It would produce a spectral reading almost identical to 6EQUJ5. A one-time event, a fluke alignment of ice, gas, and stray radio waves. An extraordinary coincidence, yes, but not a message, not a greeting, just noise echoing back at us from the dark. She paused, letting the weight of her cold, hard logic settle over the room. She had given this lecture, or versions of it, a dozen times. It was a necessary sanitation, clearing away the fanciful dust to get to the clean, hard bedrock of fact. A hand went up in the third row. A young man with bright, earnest eyes. Elara sighed internally, but gave a curt nod. "Dr. Vance," the student began, his voice filled with an untainted sincerity that grated on her. "I get the science, The comet theory is elegant, but even if it's true, don't you think there's a certain beauty in the mystery of it? The idea that for a moment, the entire world thought we weren't alone? Isn't that worth something? Elara stared at him. She didn't see a student. She saw the embodiment of the intellectual rot she fought against. The desire for a comforting narrative over a complex truth. She felt the familiar, bitter taste of impatience. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was as cold and precise as a scalpel. "No," she said, the single syllable cutting through the silence. "Beauty is in the truth. It is in the verifiable, the testable, the knowable. The rest," she gave a final, dismissive glance at the iconic 6EQUJ5 on the screen, "is just comforting fictions we tell ourselves so we don't have to face the silence." She held the student's gaze for a beat longer, watching the hopeful light in his eyes flicker and die. Good, she thought. One less believer. The lab was her sanctuary, a sterile, minimalist space where the only art was the silent, flowing cascade of code on a monitor, and the only music was the low, steady hum of server fans. Night had fallen hours ago, turning the large window into a black mirror that reflected the stark, controlled environment within. Elara sat before a bank of 3 monitors, the harsh blue-white light carving shadows onto her face. On the central screen was the face of Dr. Marcus Thorne. He was in his 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a smile that could charm funding out of a stone. As the head of the SETI Institute, he was the de facto king of their small, specialized world and Elara's former mentor. "Another brilliant evisceration, I hear," Thorne said, his voice smooth and avuncular through the speakers. "Professor Albright said you left half the freshman class in an existential crisis." "They'll recover," Elara said flatly, taking a sip of cold coffee from a ceramic mug. "Better they have it now than waste their careers chasing ghosts." Thorne chuckled. "Always the pragmatist. It's why we love you, Elara, and it's why the board was so impressed with your proposal. The grant is officially approved. All of it." Elara felt a small, unfamiliar flutter in her chest. She quickly suppressed it. "That's good to hear, Marcus. The server racks aren't cheap." "No, they are not," he agreed. "But if your AI can do what you claim it can, if you can build a model that can sift through 50 years of archival noise and definitively, once and for all, pinpoint the cometary signature that created the wow, signal that's worth a hell of a lot more than a few servers. It's closure. It's putting this one to bed for good." He leaned closer to his camera, his charming smile tightening just a fraction at the edges. A subtle shift in the power dynamic. "We need definitive answers, Elara, not more questions. The Institute needs to be seen as the authority, not a clearinghouse for UFO folklore. You're not just running an experiment, you're slaying the wow. Dragon for us." "I understand," she said, and she did. She was being funded to build the ultimate weapon of falsification, a tool so powerful it could reach back in time and prove the magic trick was just a clever arrangement of smoke and mirrors. It was the culmination of her life's work. "I know you do," Thorne said, his smile returning to its full wattage. "No one is more qualified. Call me when the dragon is dead." The screen went blank. The only sound was the hum of the machines, the digital heart of the AI she would now build. She called it Kepler, a seeker of order in the chaos. Elara leaned back, the tension leaving her shoulders for the first time all day. She had the funding, she had the mission. She would prove her thesis was right. Her eyes drifted to a small, framed photograph on the edge of her desk, half hidden behind a stack of journals. It was her, 20 years younger, standing next to Thorne beside the great dish of the Arecibo Observatory. Both of them were beaming, squinting in the Puerto Rican sun, full of a boundless optimism she could barely remember feeling. His approval had been her world then. In the sterile quiet of the lab, she had to admit to herself that a part of her, a part she hated, still craved it. She would build Kepler, she would find the truth, and she would make him proud. With Thorne's blessing and the grant money secured, Elara's lab transformed from a quiet theoretical space into a humming, thrumming nerve center. The next 6 months blurred into a single, continuous stream of effort, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a stubborn refusal to sleep more than was strictly necessary for survival. The mission was no longer an abstract proposal. It was a physical entity growing around her, built from silicon, copper, and sheer force of will. The montage of Kepler-S birth was a frenzy of creation. We see Elara-S hands, a blur across a keyboard, lines of elegant, brutal code filling a screen. We see her standing before a whiteboard, so covered in complex algorithms and scrawled notes that it resembled the ravings of a mad prophet. Servers arrived on pallets, sleek black monoliths that she installed herself. Her knuckles scraped raw from wrestling with rack mounts and cable snakes. The air in the lab grew thick with the smell of hot electronics and ozone, the scent of a new mind coming online. She fed her creation its diet. Decades of raw, unglamorous data. The digital ghosts of the Big Ear radio telescope. Magnetic tapes converted to petabytes. Archives from Jodrell Bank, Parkes, Arecibo. An ocean of cosmic noise, the faint, incessant hiss of the universe talking to itself. Interspersed with this obsessive focus were flashes of pure frustration. A simulation crashing, wiping out a week's worth of processing. A line of code, a single misplaced semicolon, causing a cascade of errors that took 3 sleepless nights to trace. A thrown coffee mug, shattering against a concrete wall, the dark liquid dripping down like blood. In these moments, her exhaustion was palpable. She lived on takeout from a place that put its menu in a plastic sleeve, her desk a graveyard of styrofoam containers. But through it all, she was relentless. She was the ultimate rational creator, forging a mind of pure logic, a weapon of absolute falsification, designed for a single purpose, to kill a ghost. The day finally came. The code was compiled, the diagnostics were clean, the databases were indexed. Kepler was complete. Elara stood before the main monitor, the culmination of half a year of her life humming softly in the racks beside her. There was no ceremony, no champagne, just a final systems check and a deep breath. She brought up Kepler's primary command interface. The screen was black, with a simple, elegant cursor blinking patiently. She typed the command, her fingers sure and steady. Initiate, search protocol 1A, comet signature, analysis 1977. She hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single line appeared on the screen. Processing. Below it, a progress bar began to fill, agonizingly slowly. 0.1. Elara pulled up a chair. She had expected this. The dataset was colossal. Sifting through that much noise for a faint, transient signature was like trying to find a single specific grain of sand on every beach on Earth. Still, she had expected a little more initial fanfare, a jolt of activity. Instead, there was just the quiet, methodical crawl of the percentage. Hours bled into one another. The sun went down, plunging the lab into the familiar darkness, illuminated only by the glow of the monitors. Elara watched, her confidence unwavering. Her thesis was sound. The comet theory was the only one that fit the available evidence. Kepler would find the signature. It was only a matter of time. She began to talk to the machine, her voice a low murmur in the quiet room. Come on, Kepler. It's in there. You're the most sophisticated pattern recognition system ever built. This should be easy for you. The progress bar hit 17. She paced the room, restlessness setting in. She felt like a prosecutor waiting for a jury to return with the obvious guilty verdict. Her frustration wasn't with the possibility that she might be wrong. That thought didn't even enter her mind. It was with the perceived stubbornness of the universe, the sheer bloody-minded effort it took to prove something that was so clearly, fundamentally true. You have the trajectory data for 266p Christensen, she said to the screen, gesturing with a half-eaten protein bar. You have the hydrogen cloud density models. You just have to overlay them, connect the dots, just find it. The progress bar crept past 32. Elara sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. The slow, steady march of the percentage was beginning to feel less like progress and more like a silent mockery of her impatience. She knew she should sleep, that the process would take at least a full day, maybe more. But she couldn't tear herself away. She was tethered to that slowly growing bar of light, waiting for the vindication she knew was coming. Elara was jolted from a shallow, dreamless doze by a sound she had not yet heard. It wasn't the harsh blare of an error alarm, but a soft, persistent, three-note chime. It was the sound she had coded to signal the completion of a task. She snapped upright in her chair, her neck stiff, her heart hammering. Her eyes shot to the main screen. The progress bar was gone. In its place, in clean white sans serif font, was the result. Comet signature, negative. Elara stared, her mind struggling to parse the two words. Negative. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. A bug. A catastrophic failure in the core logic she had spent months perfecting. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, that's not right. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the logs, the raw output data. It was all clean, no errors, no corrupted files, no system flags. She ran a full diagnostic on Kepler-S core programming. She scanned the integrity of the archival data. Everything was perfect. The machine had performed exactly as designed, and then she saw it. Below the stark, impossible negative, a new line of text was flashing, blinking in time with the soft chime. Anomalous correlation detected, cross-spectrum analysis initiated. Her blood ran cold. Anomalous correlation. Those words didn't belong in her program. It was an emergent command, a function Kepler had initiated on its own. Her creation, the pinnacle of her logic, had not only contradicted her hypothesis, it had found something else, something unexpected, something that shouldn't be there. The first crack had appeared in the armor of her certainty. Her own weapon had just refused to fire and was now pointing at something else entirely, out there in the dark. The blinking cursor of the new command, anomalous correlation detected, was an insult, a challenge. It was a bug in the machine, a ghost that Elara, as its creator, was now duty-bound to exorcise. For the next 3 days, she worked with a feverish intensity, not to understand the anomaly, but to erase it. Her lab, once a temple of reason, became a battleground between a scientist and her own inconvenient data. She started by assuming a hardware flaw, running deep-level diagnostics on every server rack, every processor, every stick of RAM. All systems reported optimal function. Then she moved to the software, convinced a subtle error in her own code was creating a false positive. She recompiled Kepler-S core logic, re-indexed the entire petabyte-scale database, and reran the initial search. The result was the same: Comet's signature, negative. And the patient, blinking cursor of the anomaly waiting. Frustration gave way to a kind of targeted aggression. If the machine wouldn't find the answer she knew was there, she would force it. She began to manually adjust the search parameters, feeding Kepler a narrower and narrower set of data, essentially guiding it by the hand toward the comet hypothesis. She highlighted the exact trajectory of comet 2166P Christensen. She artificially amplified the expected frequencies for a hydrogen cloud reflection. She was no longer a scientist seeking truth. She was an ideologue trying to manufacture it. Kepler, the child of her own logic, refused to be led. Each time she attempted to force the result, the AI would process her command and then reject it. A new line would appear on the screen in cold, emotionless text. Error. Forced parameter detected. Results compromised. And then it would revert on its own to its last valid state, the screen once again displaying the blinking anomalous correlation detected. The machine was more objective than she was. It was more committed to the scientific method than its own creator. On the fourth day, hunched over her keyboard, pale and sleepless, Elara finally broke. The fight wasn't with Kepler, it was with herself. It was with the part of her that feared being wrong more than it loved finding the truth. With a sigh that felt like it came from the deepest part of her soul, she conceded. Her hypothesis was dead. The data was all that mattered now. Her fingers, trembling slightly, typed a new command. The words felt like a surrender. Show me the anomaly. The main screen flickered, the sterile black interface dissolving into something vast, chaotic, and beautiful. It was a visual representation of the cosmic background noise Kepler had been analyzing, a swirling, interactive sea of digital static, a million shades of grey, like an ocean of television snow from the dawn of time. For a moment, Elara was just mesmerized by the sheer scale of it, the raw, unfiltered voice of the cosmos. Then Kepler went to work. A tiny section of the swirling grey sea began to glow with a faint golden light. It was a thread, an almost impossibly thin strand of data, virtually invisible against the overwhelming noise surrounding it. If her own eyes had been searching for this, they would have missed it 1,000,000 times over. But Kepler's focus was absolute. Isolating correlated data stream, the text on the secondary monitor read. The image on the main screen zoomed in, the sea of grey static rushing past until the single golden thread filled the view. Kepler began to amplify it, filtering out the background noise layer by layer. With each pass, the thread grew brighter, clearer, and then a shape began to emerge, a pattern. A waveform started to draw itself across the screen, faint at first, then growing in definition. It was a signal, structured, coherent. Elara's breath hitched in her throat, her heart hammered against her ribs. She brought up a new window on another monitor, pulling up the iconic archival image of the WOW signal, the 6EQUJ5 circled in red. She placed the old data side by side with the new waveform Kepler had just excavated from the noise. They were not identical. The new signal was fainter, more degraded, like a photograph of a photograph. But the core structure, the sharp 72-second ramp up in intensity, the specific frequency band, the sudden sharp cutoff, it was all there. The ghost of it. A distorted, decaying echo, hiding in the background radiation of the universe for 48 years. A single, foundational assumption of the WOW signal mythos was that it was a one-off event. It had never been detected again. But here, on her screen, was the empirical, visual proof that it had. It was still there, faint, ethereal, but there. Elara stared, her mind reeling, her skepticism now aimed not at the old myth, but at the impossible, irrefutable data glowing on her screen. Driven by a new, terrifying curiosity, Elara pushed further into the mystery. Her previous goal had been to prove what the signal was. Now, she had to understand what this new ghost of a signal is. Kepler, she said, her voice hoarse. Analyze the structural integrity of the echo signal, modulation, frequency drift, information density. Render a full 3D model. Processing. The two-dimensional waveform on the screen collapsed and then reformed into a three-dimensional object. A glowing, translucent ribbon of light hanging in the simulated void of the monitor. Elara could manipulate it, turn it, examine it from any angle. As she slowly rotated the model, she saw something that made the hair on her arms stand on end. The decay of the signal, the way its amplitude and frequency modulated over the 72-second duration, wasn't random noise or natural degradation. There was a pattern, a complex, repeating pattern that nested inside itself. As she zoomed in on one section of the signal, the larger pattern repeated on a smaller, more compressed scale. She zoomed in again, and there it was again. Smaller still. It was a fractal, a mathematical signature of deliberate, intelligent design. Information density analysis, she whispered. The text appeared instantly. Signal structure, consistent with highly compressed data archive. Information density exceeds all known natural phenomena. The room suddenly felt very cold. This wasn't just an echo. This was a message, packed and compressed with an efficiency that made our own technology look primitive. This was a file, and the echo was the file name, still faintly visible after the file itself had been sent. Then came the final blows, delivered by Kepler with the serene, brutal logic she had programmed into it. A new analysis appeared on the screen, a probabilistic assessment based on the fractal complexity. Probability of natural origin 0.001. Suggested signal type. Distress beacon. Elara's mind went blank. Distress beacon, a cosmic SOS. Before she could even process the words, a final line of text blinked into existence. A recommendation from the mind she had built. A suggestion that changed everything. Encoded message detected. Decryption recommended. Elara stumbled back from her chair, her legs weak. The chair hit the concrete floor with a sharp crack that echoed in the silent lab. She brought a trembling hand up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning profound horror. Thorn had asked her to slay a dragon, but what she had found, hiding in the dark, was something else entirely. It wasn't a myth, it was a tombstone, and it was still broadcasting. The week that followed her discovery was a blur of frantic, meticulous work. Elara slept in her lab, her world shrinking to the glow of her monitors and the silent, patient presence of Kepler. She wasn't horrified anymore. The initial shock had been burned away by a cold, urgent sense of purpose. She triple-checked every line of data, every algorithm, every statistical model. She prepared her presentation with the precision of a lawyer preparing for a capital case, anticipating every question, every angle of attack. She was about to walk into the heart of the scientific establishment and tell them that their most cherished mystery wasn't a mystery at all. It was a message in a bottle from a shipwreck. She stood outside the polished oak doors of the SETI Institute's main conference room, her presentation loaded onto a data stick that felt as heavy as a brick in her hand. She looked different from the confident, dismissive lecturer of a few months ago. She was thinner, paler, with a haunted, restless energy in her eyes. She was nervous, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, unshakable determination. She was right. The data proved it. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the doors open and walked in. The room was exactly as she remembered. Long mahogany table, plush leather chairs, and the faint scent of old paper and intellectual arrogance. Seated around the table were 6 of the most respected minds in radio astronomy, and at its head, Dr. Marcus Thorne. He gave her a warm, welcoming smile, but his eyes were guarded, unreadable. "Elara," he said, "thank you for coming on such short notice. We're all very eager to hear what you found." For the next hour, she laid it all out. She spoke with a calm, methodical clarity, her voice never wavering. She started with her initial mission to prove the comet theory. She showed them Kepler's definitive, negative result. She then walked them step by step through the AI's unexpected discovery of the anomalous correlation. She put the ghost signal on the main screen, side by side with the original WOW data, letting the stark, visual evidence hang in the silent room. Finally, she presented the structural analysis. The 3D model of the signal rotated slowly on the screen, its impossible, nested, fractal patterns glowing in the dim light. "The signal's structure is not random," she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. "Kepler's analysis shows a level of information compression that is mathematically inconsistent with any known natural phenomenon. The probability of this signal being of natural origin is less than 1,000th of 1%. She paused, letting the weight of her final statement settle. "The only conclusion that fits the data," she said softly, "is that the signal is artificial. It's a technology, not a phenomenon. And based on its characteristics, Kepler suggests it is a distress beacon." Silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the room's climate control. The 6 scientists stared, their faces a mixture of stunned disbelief and deep, ingrained skepticism. Elara looked at Thorne. His patient, professorial demeanor had vanished. His expression was hardening into something she had never seen from him before. A cold, impenetrable wall. Thorne let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment before he steepled his fingers and leaned forward. When he spoke, his voice was no longer warm or avuncular. It was the voice of a judge. "Thank you, Elara. That was a remarkable presentation." He didn't look at the data on the screen. He looked only at her. "Let's talk about your methodology. Let's talk about Kepler." The attack, when it came, was not aimed at her evidence, but at her instrument. "Oh, you've built an AI," Thorne began, his tone deceptively reasonable. "A highly sophisticated pattern recognition machine. You fed it an ocean of noise and tasked it with finding a pattern. And it did. Are we supposed to be surprised by this?" Elara felt a flush of anger. "Marcus, it didn't find the pattern I told it to find. It found one that contradicts my own hypothesis. Or," Thorne countered smoothly, "its emergent logic, which by your own admission is too complex to fully map, has created a false positive, a digital ghost, an echo in its own machine mind. We call this a black box, Elara. You can see the input and you can see the output, but you cannot possibly account for every variable in between. How can you be certain this isn't just a flaw in the code, an algorithmic pareidolia?" "The statistics," she started, but he cut her off. "The statistics are generated by the black box itself. It's circular reasoning." He turned his gaze to the other members of the committee, who were now nodding in agreement, their initial shock solidifying into comfortable doubt. He had given them an out, a rational-sounding reason to dismiss the impossible. "You came to us months ago with a mission to debunk a myth," Thorne continued, his voice taking on a note of paternal disappointment that was far more insulting than anger. "And now it seems you've only created a new one. You're framing this conclusion as science, but from where I'm sitting, it looks a great deal like a leap of faith." He stood up, a clear signal that the meeting was over. "My recommendation is that you run full intensive diagnostics for months if necessary. I would strongly advise you not to publish any of this Until you can explain precisely how your machine came to this conclusion, it would be a great embarrassment to you and to this institution to chase after what is likely nothing more than a very expensive computer error. He walked to the door, pausing beside her. He leaned in, his voice a low whisper for her alone. "Don't do this, Elara. Drop it." It wasn't advice, it was a command. He wasn't her mentor anymore. He was the gatekeeper, and he was barring the gate. The drive back to her lab was a haze of silent fury. Dejection warred with a deep, burning sense of betrayal. Thorne hadn't debated her. He hadn't engaged with the data. He had dismissed her, humiliated her, and wielded the very skepticism she once championed as a weapon to shut her down. He wasn't protecting science. He was protecting the status quo. He was afraid. She slammed the door to her lab, the sound echoing in the empty space. She slumped into her chair, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only a hollow ache. It was over. He would block any attempt to publish. He would poison any grant proposals. He had the power to isolate her, to turn her into a pariah with a pet theory about alien ghosts. Her eyes fell on her monitor, which she had left on. Her email client was open. A new message sat at the top of her inbox. The sender was the editor of the Astrophysical Journal, the most prestigious publication in their field. Her heart skipped a beat. Had someone from the committee? She opened the email. It was a brief, professional note. "Dr. Vance, we have just received a preemptive note of concern from Dr. Marcus Thorne regarding a forthcoming, as yet unsubmitted paper of yours. He raises serious questions about the methodology of your AI analysis. Given Dr. Thorne's standing, we would require a full and robust rebuttal to these concerns before even considering your work for peer review." Elara stared at the screen, the words blurring. He hadn't even waited for her to leave the institute. He had moved to discredit her, to sabotage her, before she was even out the door. The hollow ache inside her crystallized into something hard and sharp. Anger. Pure, cold, defiant anger. He thought he could bury this. He thought he could bury her. Her gaze shifted to the other monitor, the one where Kepler's interface was still active. It was waiting patiently, just as it had been for days. The final line of its analysis blinked softly in the darkness. Encoded message detected. Decryption recommended. Thorne had drawn his line in the sand. He had chosen dogma over data, fear over truth. And in doing so, he had left her with only one path forward. She leaned toward the keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. Her internal conflict was over. This was no longer about career, or reputation, or even Thorne's approval. It was about the truth. She took a deep breath and typed a single word. Execute! The moment Elara's finger lifted from the enter key, the lab changed. The low, steady hum of the servers pitched upward into a high-frequency whine of intense processing. On the main monitor, the simple text interface vanished, replaced by a torrent of information so dense and alien, it was nearly incomprehensible. It was an assault of pure data, cascades of glowing geometric symbols, unlike any human language, flowed down the screen. They were followed by complex star charts of unknown constellations, galaxies mapped from an impossible vantage point millions of light years away. Then came intricate biological diagrams of flora and fauna that had never known Earth's sun, their forms both beautiful and terrifyingly strange. It was not a single, coherent message. It was an entire civilization's worth of knowledge, a vast compressed archive poured into a 72-second digital scream across the void. It was the final library of a dying world. Kepler, The mind she had built worked tirelessly to make sense of the flood. It couldn't translate the entire archive that would take decades, centuries, but it could isolate and translate key fragments, the metadata and index files of the archive, the pieces that gave context to the whole. On the secondary monitor, a translation log began to scroll, the words stark and chilling in their simplicity. Our sun is dying. The star you call HD 164595. We have known for 1,000 of your years, a billion voices silenced. Our great cities of crystal and light are dust. Our oceans boil, we try to warn others. The journey takes too long. The signal degrades. This is our last, do not make our mistakes. The expansion is a trap. The silence is not empty. There is a great filter, and we have failed to pass through. Elara could only watch, paralyzed by a mixture of profound awe and bottomless horror. She was witnessing the last will and testament of a ghost. The data stream shifted, the symbols and diagrams replaced by a final, terrifying piece of the archive. It was a simulation. Kepler labeled it Stellar Collapse Event. To minus 120 years, she watched as a brilliant, vibrant star, the sun of a billion silenced voices, began to swell and distort. It turned a violent red, shedding its outer layers in great, fiery plumes. Then, with a speed that defied physics, it collapsed in on itself, shrinking into a single, impossibly small point before vanishing completely. In its place, there was only a black wound in the fabric of space-time, a perfect sphere of nothingness that began to hungrily devour the last remnants of its own solar system. A black hole. The final, silent tombstone. The data stream ended. The servers whined back down to their normal hum. The screens went back to their default state, leaving only Kepler-S final translation log glowing in the dark. Elara sank to her knees, the cold concrete of the lab floor pressing against her. The silence of the universe, the silence she had once found so clean and truthful, was no longer empty. It was the silence of a graveyard. The auditorium at the Zurich Polytechnic was packed to the rafters. It was the largest open astrophysics conference of the year, and Elara had used her last remaining shred of professional credibility to secure a keynote address. She had bypassed the committees, the peer reviews, the gatekeepers. She was taking her case directly to the world. In the front row, Dr. Marcus Thorne sat with his arms crossed, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He had tried to stop this. He had called the conference organizers, threatened the university, but the talk had already been announced. The title alone, the 6EQU-J5 Anomaly, a post-mortem, had created a firestorm of speculation. He was powerless to stop it now. All he could do was watch. Elara walked onto the stage. She was calm. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a somber, unshakable gravity. She didn't just present her data this time. She didn't just show the ghost signal or the fractal analysis. She showed them everything. For nearly 50 years, she began, her voice echoing through the massive hall. We have debated what the wow signal was. I am here to tell you that we were asking the wrong question. The question is not what it was, but what it is. Behind her, the main screen lit up, not with slides, but with Kepler-S decryption interface. She showed them the cascade of symbols, the star charts, the biological diagrams. She put the chilling translation log on the screen for the entire world to see. My AI, Kepler, has found what I believe to be the partial index of a vast data archive, transmitted on a repeating loop, she explained. I am not here today to ask you to believe me. I am here to ask you to verify my findings for yourselves. She looked directly at Thorne. her gaze steady and clear. The principles of science demand transparency and repeatability. Therefore, I have just made Kepler's core code and decryption algorithms open source. The raw data from the Big Ear telescope is already public. Any institution with sufficient computing power can now run this analysis. You don't have to take my word for it. You can see for yourselves. A wave of murmuring swept through the auditorium. It was an unprecedented move, an act of radical transparency that made Thorne's accusations of a black box utterly obsolete. She had given them the key. She let her eyes sweep across the crowd of thousands of scientists, students, journalists. "The universe is not silent," she said, her voice filled with a profound and terrible certainty. "It is full of ghosts, full of warnings." The wow signal wasn't a greeting. It was a 72-second eulogy. It was a warning. Weeks later, Elara stood on the catwalk of the Green Bank telescope in West Virginia, the colossal white dish gleaming in the dusky golden hour light. The air was cool and crisp. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was another news alert. The Vance anomaly. French and German labs confirm fractal signature. It was one of dozens. Labs all over the world were replicating Kepler's findings. The truth was out. She had won. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt quiet. She looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. For her entire life, she had looked at them as data points, as burning balls of gas subject to the predictable laws of physics. Now, she saw them differently. Each point of light was a potential story, a potential voice, a potential warning. Her cynicism, the armor she had worn for so long, had been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, aching sense of connection and melancholy. She was no longer a debunker. She was a keeper of secrets, the first librarian for the voices of the dead. She was alone, but for the first time in her life, she did not feel like the universe was empty. The great dish beside her slowly, silently, began to move, turning away from the known constellations and pointing its ear toward a new, unknown patch of the deep, dark, silent sky, listening. There's a fascinating question at the heart of this story about the wow signal. Do we prefer a comforting mystery or a cold, hard truth? Dr. Elara Vance begins as a champion for the cold, hard truth. Her mission is to kill the romance of the signal, to reduce this grand what if to a simple, explainable fluke cosmic plumbing, as she calls it. And for a moment, we see the appeal of that certainty. It's clean, it's logical. It puts the universe back in a neat, understandable box. But the beautiful irony of her journey is that her own relentless pursuit of scientific proof doesn't lead her to a boring answer. Instead, it uncovers a truth far more profound and terrifying than any simple alien greeting. Her science doesn't debunk the myth so much as it validates the feeling behind it, the sense that the signal mattered. In the end, the verifiable fact she uncovers, a distress call from a dead civilization, is both a piece of data and a ghost story. It is a 72-second eulogy, a myth for a new age, but one that is backed by irrefutable proof. This story suggests that perhaps the ultimate purpose of science isn't to erase mystery, but to lead us to the edge of even deeper, more meaningful ones. It leaves me wondering, what would you rather have? A hopeful mystery that might be a lie, or a terrifying truth that you can prove?